Losing fights in zero build is frustrating, and even more frustrating when you don't realize what you're doing wrong. So today I will share the 4 most common mistakes that lose you fights in zero build, including the major reason why sliding in Fortnite can be the worst thing that you can possibly do. But before we get to that, let's talk about the first mistake that you're making, and that is wasting your stamina. This may be one of the main reasons people are losing fights in chapter 6. With the addition of the Typhoon Blade, managing your stamina has become very important. I have lost numerous fights because I overuse my stamina, or perhaps I win a fight and a third party comes and I am not able to properly disengage because I have no stamina. And I know for a fact this happens to you. So here's some things you need to do to conserve your stamina and a great way to practice doing so. First, you need to build a habit of looking at your stamina bar. I know some people even increase their HUD settings to be able to use it much easier, but you need to treat it the same way you do your health bar. Simply having more awareness of your stamina bar will make it easier to conserve it. Secondly, utilize the sword as much as possible. Now, when you hold your sword out, it takes much longer to run out of stamina. So a lot of times when you are in the middle of a fight, just pull out your sword without jumping or dashing, as this is definitely helping your stamina be reserved. Jumping and dashing is amazing movement, but if you overdash, like I did here in this example, you will be stuck completely still, and it won't matter if you have the advantage in the fight because you are now a sitting duck. On top of that, keep in mind that sliding does not use up your stamina, which is why bunny hopping and sliding at the same time without pressing your sprint button can be so effective in the middle of a fight. And the last tip to conserving your stamina is always mixing in a slide when you sprint. If you spam your slide button as you sprint, you basically save twice as much stamina as you would just sprinting. And this is 10 times better when you combine it with having the sword out. And now let's move on to the second mistake you're making, and that is running away from fights. We have all been in a situation where we get jumped out of nowhere and it feels as if the only option is to run as much as possible. But if you're fighting a decent player, running will actually give you a lesser chance of winning that fight. And well, why is that? Well, it's actually pretty simple. When you are running, you are not looking at your opponent, therefore not gathering any information about them. And a lot of times your opponent could be leaving themselves vulnerable in the open, giving you some free beam. So instead of running, simply take cover. You definitely shouldn't just turn and shoot, but don't run until you have distance. Simply run into cover, even if it's close to your opponent, because 9 out of 10 times the opposing player will make a push on you that will leave them open. And let's take this fight I took here for an example. So here I get cracked as I'm looting this chest, so I instantly pull out my sword and take the next possible cover, which is that bush right in front of me. I then instantly turn around to gather information and I spot the player shooting me out of a bush. And here, instead of using my Oni mask and fully disengaging, I'm using my AR to see if this player will get overly aggressive. He continues to spray through the bush, knowing that he could probably kill me if he just hits one lucky shot. So that's when I pop a bunker. And here I considered running away, but the player wasn't even pushing me, so it made more sense for me to sit in the bunker. The problem is I have no heals. So the best thing I can do here is prepare for him to get overly aggressive, which is exactly what I catch him doing here as I peek this bunker. And because he simply shockwaves in a straight line to me, these are very free beams and I'm able to eliminate him before he even lands. Now here in this next example, I am running in the open and this player decides to void on me and catches me completely off guard. So I instantly switch to my shockwaves, and here, having 5 shockwaves, a lot of players would just burn them all to try and get as far away from this player as possible. But this player only took off my overshield, so I pop the shockwave, instantly pop a bunker, and immediately look at the direction which I came from to see if he's tracing me. And because I turned around, he didn't even have his weapons equipped and I was able to take some free shots here. He throws his void pretty far away, and here I'm simply playing for information, trying to figure out where he's at. Turns out he landed on a tree and got me off guard yet again. So I shockwave once more, I pop my sprite and pop my bunker on top of that, and here I'm playing patient for him to play overly aggressive. But notice how I'm reading his pattern over and over. This guy is playing very aggressive. Now that I've learned his pattern, I'm simply waiting for him to do it again. And just like I predicted, he jumps right on me and I'm able to take a free shot on him. I then hug right back in the bunker. I hit the door with my shoulder to make him think I'm going out that way. Instantly shock upwards and start taking some hip fire shots. And you can see that he's confused at this point and I've become the aggressor and I'm able to crack him. And instead of just chasing him, because he was playing so overly aggressive, he overpeaked dramatically. It's just I had my gun out, I was able to clean up this fight pretty easily. So what you can learn from this is not that running away is not possible, but you should understand your options and read how your opponent is playing. Because if I had to deplete all my shockwaves to run away and he was still gonna play overly aggressive and try to catch up to me, I would still end up having to fight him. But if the person that catches you by surprise decides decides not to commit to the fight, then running away can be a viable option. And now getting jumped like this only happens when you're running around in the open, which leads us to the third reason that you're losing your fight, is being out in the open way too often. I can guarantee that the amount of times you've died because you were simply running in the open is absurd. See, players like myself are always looking for a kill, and the easiest kill is someone mindlessly running around in the open. So what should you do? Well, to start with, just like with conserving stamina, always be mindful of your positioning. I promise if you focus on running in areas that are less exposed, you reduce your chances of being fried quite drastically. And pay attention to high ground locations around you, because oftentimes you can simply run on hills and mountains to have a clear oversight of your surroundings. Another thing you must do is when you are running in the open, hold your bunkers or mobility items out. The amount of times that I've seen players die because they are swapping weapons and sliding around like crazy is more than you might think. Always give a purpose to the items in your inventory. And lastly, I always recommend having a car, especially if you do not like rocking cover items in your inventory. I covered in my last video how prospering utilizes the car in solo versus squads, and I think having a car is very underrated. And now let's talk about why sliding can be the worst thing you can do in a fight. When you think of movement, sliding is one of the first things that comes to mind. So before we dive into why sliding can be a big mistake, let's talk about what makes sliding a good thing. Sliding not only allows you to carry momentum, but also conserve your stamina like we talked about earlier. You can also use sliding to slide kick the enemy to send them flying. But is sliding a good thing to do in the middle of a fight? Well, the answer is yes and no. And let me break it down. So let's say this right here is me. This right here is my enemy. Anything that is right in front of him and is in his vision would be considered the hot zone. No matter how much you slide around, jump, spam, or use your sword, being in front of your enemy makes it very easy to hit you. So the goal is to always avoid this area, with the best places being anywhere outside of this hot zone, the best area being right behind them. So when sliding around, you need to focus on breaking your opponent's camera. If you're sliding around corners, you have to think, is your opponent pre-aiming this? Because if they are, more likely than not, you're not as hard to hit as you might think. So what is a better alternative? Well, when fighting close range, you want to make your best efforts to slide in a direction that would be breaking the opponent's camera, like in those safe zones that we talked about. But the easier way to break your opponent's camera is to actually jump. Jumping over your opponent's head is almost always more effective than sliding right in front of their face. Now, of course, if you're able to slide kick them before they're able to take a shot at you, this is a great way to confuse your opponent. But more often than not, in the process of doing so, the opponent is going to be able to crack you. So sliding isn't necessarily useless so long as that you're doing it with the intention to stay out of the hot zone. And on top of that, if you do have the Typhoon Blade, don't underestimate how effective it is to jump over somebody's head trying to avoid their hot zone. Now remember, the hot zone of the opponent is constantly changing, which means that you constantly need to be paying attention to where your opponent is facing, and that is the perfect way to use your movement to make yourself not only unhittable, but ready for any upcoming third parties that may be coming your way. And if you want to get all the insights on how to properly master movement, consider clicking the video that's on your screen.